So I'm just going to play around with this a little bit, and I will jump back to this when I'm done, and I'm just going to make a little place for my character to walk around while we do some prototyping. Okay, so I've created a fairly simple scene here, just using the principles that we had learned before. I've got some cubes stretched out for walls here, 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 and here. I've got some half-length walls here and here. Then I just took another cube and placed these here as pillars in the corner. And these pillars can just help make these junctions look a little more clean, as you can see once you're in here. Now the material I used, you can probably grab from the materials yourself. The one that I chose here is called, let's have a look. I just used this one called Wax A. It should be in your thing. You could use stone if you wanted to, or whatever else. As you see, when you change it in the material, it changes everything in the scene. So that's it. The next thing we should look at is actually how to organize these things better. And the best way to do that, other than by just naming them, and you can shift click, grab them all, and name them, is we need to use something called empty game objects. And by right clicking in the screen, and we're going to use this all the time, choose create empty. And so now this is a game object in the screen that's just a holder for other game objects. It has nothing in itself. So I'm going to call this, for example, pillars. And I started with an underscore, and this is just convention to tell us that it's empty. It's an empty game object, and that it's not doesn't hold anything itself. It's not doing anything, not displaying anything. It's just a container for other things. So I can grab all these other pillars and put them under this empty game object. Now when I move this empty game object, it moves all of the pillars with it. So generally speaking, before you put everything in there, it's good to zero out again your empty game objects so that it's right, there we go, in the middle. So we'll make another one called walls. I'm going to grab all of my walls. I'm going to zero this out, put all of my walls into it, close that up. And now I'm going to make one last one here called environment. And we can just put the floor in there. We can put pillars in there and everything else into environment. So now we have it all nice and clean. Now, there's also different reasons to do this other than keeping your scene clean. But one important thing is that we can disable or enable everything within environment. So if we go over here next to the name, we have a little checkbox. We can uncheck it, which will disable everything within environment. So for example, if we drill down and we just want to remove the walls, we can disable all of the walls or the pillars or just the floor. The next thing we're going to look at, but we haven't talked about too much, and again, I'm not going to deep dive here, we're going to do it later when we get into the VR stuff. For now, I just want you to know about the lighting. So there is a toggle here in your scene to enable lighting effects or disable. So this is what the scene will look like with the lighting effects on. And sometimes when you're designing and developing things, it's really hard to see, like I can't see into these corners, so you might want to disable the lighting effects so we can see everything more evenly. Okay, we can also change the view here. Right now we're looking at the shaded view. We could change to wireframe, and this may be important when you're looking at, like, say, you have a big castle and you need to see what's beyond or behind something. We have a shaded wireframe, and we have all kinds of other ones that we're not going to use for now, but we might look into some of them later, such as overdraw. But for now, we're just going to stick with the shaded. And I'm going to turn off my light effects just so I can see everything easier. Okay, so when I'm making VR games, I like to do a lot of prototyping actually not in VR. When you're using VR for prototyping, it means that you have to jump in and out of your VR rig a lot. And that can be really time consuming just to test one small little thing. So as much as we can do outside of VR, the better. So in order to test things, there are two ways to do it. Now with VRTK, there is a virtual VR rig, which sort of acts like VR, and that's an okay way to do it. But even earlier on when you're first learning, I don't even use VR at all. We're going to use a simple third-person controller just to make sure that we can trigger the things that we need to trigger. We've got things where we need them to be. So we can use Unity's built-in third-person controller. We don't need to develop anything ourselves. And to do that, we're just going to choose Assets, Import Package, and we're going to use Characters. And we're just going to import all of the standard asset characters. And this includes a first-person controller, a third-person controller, and that sort of stuff. We're going to use the third-person controller just because it's easier to see exactly where your character is standing to see if they've triggered something. When you're doing a first-person controller, it's not always easy to see, if your body would be over or in something to know whether it's going to trigger or not. Now, this third-person controller comes with a fairly simple model called Ethan. And now we can go to Standard Assets. And we're going to choose characters, I believe, third-person character. And we want to use prefabs. A prefab is something that is already pre-made. So we can see that they have the model here for Ethan, and that they have the materials for Ethan, and the animators and animations. But we want the prefab because it has everything all put together in one thing. So we're just going to drag and drop Ethan onto the screen. In the scene view, I'm going to push F to zoom in on Ethan. And now you can see that we have a third-person controller already in our scene. Now, if we look at the inspector, Ethan's got lots of options. We really don't need to change too many of them. We are going to talk about some of these as we get started here, however. So for now, let's just, if you don't already have a scene, let's do that. So let's go to your project view, assets, and we're going to save a new scene. So I already have a scene created, you may not. So you probably want to go File, Save Scene, and it's going to ask you if you want to save a new scene, so you can go ahead and do that. If you want to make future scenes, you just click on the right mouse button, go Create, and choose Scene, and just name it like Scene 1. So if I want to go to Scene 1, I just double click on it, it brings me there. I want to go back to the new scene, I go back, and there it is. Okay, so we've got Ethan in our scene, we have everything saved. And what we're going to do is just click play for the game to start. Now this may or may not take a certain amount of time to compile for you. It might take a while. Mine didn't take too long, although we have the problem of that we cannot see where the heck Ethan is. Oh, there he is. So you can use the keys, the up, down, left, and right keys. I think the WSAD keys also work. And Ethan is all pre-programmed and scripted up, so we can just use him nice and easily for prototyping purposes. Now, we want the camera to follow Ethan. Just the way it's set right now is not very helpful for us. So let's just unplay this and see what we can do to get the camera to follow. Now, the first thing I want to do to get the camera to follow Ethan is just to get the camera in the right place. And as you can see, if we click on the camera, we can see it's just pointing randomly over here. Now, the easiest way to do this, well, let me show you the harder way first. The harder way is to grab this, the camera and move it around and try and position it behind Ethan and sort of get it where you want it to be. Sometimes a much easier way to do this is just to position your scene view where you want to be. So just put your own eyeball where you want to be. I'm going to grab the hand to just move myself up slightly. And then maybe I want to angle it down a little bit. So that would be about right for me, I think. Now what we can do is click on the camera, choose game object, and then choose align with view. And it's going to align this game object with your scene view. And so you can see the camera preview has been aligned in the perfect place. So let's check out the game view, and yes, we are where we want to be. Let's throw in the lighting effects here so it looks more similar. Good, it's pretty close. So let's push play and see what happens. And now we can move Ethan around. But unfortunately, the camera is still not following Ethan, which is what we want for a third-person controller camera. So it's just... Okay, so now that we have the camera set up with the position we want in relation to Ethan, we're just going to drag the camera and make it a child of the third-person controller. We're going to put it within this third-person controller folder. So what this means is when this folder or game object moves, this camera will move with it. And so I'm going to give you an example. We'll just zoom out here. And I will create a cube. And we have a cube weirdly way over there. So let's look at this cube. And we're going to make another cube that's a child of this cube. Or let's make a sphere so it's easier to see. And so since this one is a child, whenever we move the cube, which is the parent, the sphere will move with it. It's essentially like a folder that's holding it. So even as we rotate it, it's going to rotate the child. So in this case, Ethan, our third-person controller, is here, and the camera is just going to follow it around behind it, okay? So we'll go back to Ethan, and the camera's behind him, right where we placed it. Now let's push play. And now when we walk Ethan around, the camera will follow him nicely. It's not a perfect camera system. We could do a lot more to fix this, but that's not really the point of the game. We just want to use this for prototyping purposes. So if we push backwards, for example, it's going to have a bit of an issue. So we can just basically go forwards into the sides. But that's okay. That's all we need for this. Now, the one last thing I'm going to fix here, so before we get started on a little more prototyping, is there's some really dark shadows here that are pretty dark on that side. And we're going to just adjust the lighting a bit. So we can grab this directional light, and it doesn't matter where the directional light is in the scene. Like, you can lift it up higher or lower, or move it anywhere. This is sort of moot. What we're concerned about is the angle of this directional light. So if we change the rotation, you can see it changes the shadows on the scene. So maybe something like this is a little better for me, so I can see more. We can also change the intensity of the light. As you can see, it gets pretty bright, pretty fast. So maybe just 1 is the base. We'll just go 1.1. And we can change the color of the directional light. As you can see, fairly natural lights, more to a slightly yellow or a slight blue tint, depending on the time of day. We're going to stick with a very light yellow type color to it. And even 1 is probably enough. Now we can change the type of shadows on this light, whether we want hard shadows, and you can see them in the corners better here. If we look right in these corners, got hard shadows, soft shadows you can see up here. Or we could even do no shadows. But we definitely want some soft shadows in our case. We can adjust the quality and stuff like that, and we're going to look at that later when we're doing more optimization for VR. But for now, this is sort of enough. For what we want to do.